then, all right, so Ward and Liz, you can come back on screen. And I want to quickly introduce each of our 4 panelists before we get into this discussion of the do's and the don'ts on the job as a programmer. And I'll kind of quickly set that up too, because I think, as Ward was bringing up earlier, and as even the fact that like Anna is looking for a job, I was a little taken aback that she was looking for a job. She said she was one of those who'd been laid off. And I think it's just a perfect example of this really funky place that we're in right now as developers. And it's just an unusual kind of playing field at the moment. And that's sort of the idea of where this topic came up, of these do's and don'ts as a programmer. What are things that you're doing that maybe you don't realize are actually hurting your job? Or what are things that you could do that could reflect really well on you? I think there's a lot of obvious answers to that, but I also want to dig into those really not obvious things, the things that these 4 experts have found as they've gone through their careers, and things that maybe they've done themselves or they've seen others do. And I'm particularly eager to hear if Ward has any. His Twitter, by the way, everybody, says that he is voted #1 in humility. So love that. But let me introduce each of the 4 and then we'll get into this discussion. So I just mentioned Ward, so I'll kind of fill you in on him, but he is currently the president and co-founder of the company called IdeaBlade. And definitely you can find him at, like, I think every single ng-conf. Ward, has it been every single conference? Okay. So you could go back to any one of those conferences and find his talks. He always has very awesome costumes, and he's just an excellent teacher. He has a really great way of making things approachable to all learners, and has just a great passion and vigor for Angular. So we're excited to have him. And moving on from there, we have Lara Newsom, who is and I'm going to joke with Liz about this too. I'm calling it the tech lead at Cisco.
Oh man, you're gonna get me. I'm gonna have like a fist fight with Eric now.
But so she's coming from Cisco, but she has also given many wonderful talks. I know, Lara, so many people after your talks say how you really simplify things. You just make it so approachable for everybody to really understand. So again, go find her talks on any, of those past ng-conf YouTube videos. But we're excited to have her. I know, Lara, you've had some great experience coming from not only outside of tech, but then moving into kind of back end as well, right?
I started in back end and then moved. Yeah. So
okay. Yeah. So lots of great
there are a few jobs I haven't had.
Awesome. And then Minko, we have Minko Gechev, Minko, you just recently took a different position, if I understand correctly, right? You are now the head of product, right?
Yeah, I lead product for Angular.
Okay, on the Angular team. So we're really excited to have Minko. Your talk at ng-conf this last time, I think, set a whole new standard. Everybody was so excited after we saw, and everything that you shared, and just kind of set us up for version 15. But always, like the other 2, very, very good speaker, and we're just really excited to have you here as well, and representing the Angular team. And then everybody, our 4th panelist is someone who is very, very dear to me. This is Liz Sailing. And she and I have known each other since before I got into tech. I actually used to teach her son when he was in 3rd grade, back when I was a teacher. And Jonah is his name. So he was such a special student for me. But Liz is just such a talented developer, and wow, like she's got such a great background in her experience. So she's worked at Salesforce, she was at Adobe for a while, and now she is the director of software engineering at GitHub. So I just love that. I think that's great, because who doesn't know GitHub? And it's pretty cool to have somebody from inside the company who can kind of share some things about it with us. But anyway, we're so excited to have all 4 of you here. And yeah, like let's just get into this. So the do's and don'ts of being a programmer. What should we do? What should we not do? I think maybe it would be fun to start with, do the 4 of you have any stories or just past experiences of something that you did on the job that ended up just being not a good idea? So let's kind of start with the bad, and then as the evening goes on, we can get more into the good. But anybody can just jump in and share experiences, and if you don't have one yourself, maybe share something that you've seen a coworker or someone else that you just think maybe they thought was a good idea but ended up not being.
I think one of the big mistakes I see from people, and I haven't actually had the luxury of this, because when I started software engineering, I worked alone, and I was the only developer on my team, and I was brand new to it. So I had to find everything. But I think it's really easy to, on one hand, your more senior teammates are there to help you. On the other hand, as a senior teammate, it's really great if you try first, and if you let me know what you tried, because then I can give you better help. It's easy to fall in the trap of like, I don't know what to do, I'm going to go ask, and it's like, yeah, you should always ask questions, but like meet me halfway. Right. So that'd be one of my pieces of advice.
Nice.
Okay, I will jump in. I have so many guffaws. I will try not to share all of them, but I remember like one of the biggest heart attacks that I ever had was I jumped in. I was pretty new to the space. I just stepped in and I couldn't make heads or tails of anything that was happening in there. And so I was like, oh, I know, I'll just rewrite it. Like, it'll be so much easier. It'll be so much easier to maintain. And so I did, and I was like, this will be super fast. It'll just take me a couple days. And like, I don't know, a week, almost 2 weeks later, I'm still in this, what turned out to be a pretty massive rewrite, but it's okay. I'm ready to ship, and I've run my tests and we're good to go. And then I ship it, and I totally forgot to like close my transaction off. And so the thing just hung I just dead-ended every single process and hung the entire thing, but went home because I was done. So yeah, pro tip, make sure you test really thoroughly and just don't peace out after you ship a big rewrite. Maybe.
I think your point of like rewriting too is good, because I think it's really easy to be like, oh, this is so broken, I just need to fix the whole thing by just starting over.
The original people, they're not here anymore. I need to maintain it from here on out. It'll just be much easier.
Yeah. And sometimes like it's true, but like you need to like, I know when I was earlier in my career, I was much more keen to be like, I'll just simply rewrite this thing. And 6 months later, you're kind of like drowning and what did I do? But you've gone too far to go back, and yeah.
So what are some steps people could know? Like, now you've kind of gone through it the painful way, but if somebody's considering rewriting something, what would you say are like the warning flags, or what would be like that indicator of, yep, let's go ahead and do this, or nope, this isn't a good idea?
So from my experience, like, for example, I have had the pleasure of working on many very, very large components, right? So while the whole app, like, I don't think it made sense to throw the whole app away. There are certainly components like where if you go in and you cannot make heads or tails of what's happening, and it's literally a component that is showing read-only data, it's probably too complicated, and it might be worth just stepping back and rewriting it at that point. I mean, I think if you can really try to like isolate what is supposed to be happening, and it should be a lot simpler than it is, then it's a good candidate for a rewrite. But yeah, it's a fine line sometimes, because it's hard to sell a full rewrite too, because they take longer. And then you may not have the original requirements for why some of that logic is there, but yeah.
Oh, I have a list of, oh, Ward, you can go first.
Well, I'm a chronic rewriter, because again, voted #1 in humility and all. And so I get into that. I get into jail all the time. So my advice is to have a really good handle on the answer to the question of which is what happens if we don't rewrite it? What is it going to cost you, or me, or whomever? You know, it can be a dialogue with yourself, but presumably with the people you're seeking permission to do it. What happens if you know, could anyone achieve the goal without rewriting it? And if the answer is not really, you know, then what's it going to cost? And sometimes if I listen to that, or just run that through my head, I can back off. But that takes a certain kind of discipline that I often lack. So I have to hang my head in shame. But that's really the question: is what would happen if we just didn't do that? And I would need a really good answer to that before I could feel great about going forward. I don't know. Do other people feel the same way?
Yeah, Ward, I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the first things that I ask now when people come to me with a, you know, classic rewrite proposal is two things. Tell me why. What are you trying to accomplish here? And like you mentioned, are there other ways to do that? And then the other thing that I will push back on is like, well, what are the trade-offs? What is this going to cost me? What could we do if we don't? Like, I kind of have a strict, you know, first one to the finish line wins. And if this is working and it's serving the needs sufficiently, and maybe it's costing us a little bit more in maintenance, like I care about my teams. I want to make sure they're healthy, but if the teams are healthy and this is a little bit of noise or maybe like recent bias here, like I want to see that before I buy in on a rewrite, especially one that is only going to take us 2 weeks.
It's like the contractor's answer. Like, how long will it take? Well, 2 weeks. A sprint, 2 sprints, I guess. We normally would say 2 sprints, right?
We made a similar mistake with Angular Ivy. How long is it going to take you to complete the project and rewrite the whole runtime and keep the framework backwards compatible? Well, like maybe a release. It took us 3 years.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
But you knew the payoff there. In other words, you thought about, like, because you were really in a corner. You had a view engine, but it was really complicated, very hard to understand, and you were handcuffed. And so I think you guys probably did have that conversation. You were wrong about how long it would take, but you were not wrong about why you were doing it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a complicated trade-off. Sometimes it's really hard to evaluate. Also, we tend to underestimate. I think both you and Liz mentioned, we tend to underestimate how long a rewrite is going to take. It just seems coding is fun, so it's going to be really fast.
Totally. Another like sort of related topic, not to shift too much, but is the rabbit hole that it's very easy to go down. Like especially when I was earlier in my career, I'd be like, oh, I got to do this feature, but wouldn't it be nice if it also did this? And like, so scope creep is like, it's a real thing. And it's something that I have to like very much control myself. There's scope creep, and then there's also like refactoring creep, which is like the flip side of that, where like when you do get into a messy component, you're like, I'm going to fix this. Ooh, but then I'm going to also have to fix this. And if I fix that, then I need to fix this. And pretty soon you've touched 300 files and no one wants to review your PR, you know? So I think one of the biggest indicators I feel like of like one of the turning points in my career was when I started to be able to recognize boundaries of like, this is enough. This is, I'm going to stop here. This is, I'll make a ticket to do the rest of this work, or this is obviously a new feature. Nobody asked for it. I don't need to do that. And so, yeah.
It's actually one of the first things I remember learning at one of my jobs was that question of, is it in the scope of this story? And I think if you ask yourself that and the answer is no, it's a good indication that you shouldn't be focusing on it. But just like you said, just write a new ticket for it and take care of it in due time. But is it in the scope of this story? Yes or no?
I wish I could do that. You know, everything you're saying is so right, and I know it. And I am just one of those horrible people who cannot help themselves. So
Ward scope creep bell.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. It's terrible. So you're absolutely giving the best advice, but it's very much harder to follow than it seems.
And sometimes the scope creep can come from managers as opposed to the developers themselves. So, you know, how would, especially like a junior engineer that's maybe new to an industry or new to a company, how should they kind of handle pushing back to a manager where they feel like maybe they need to do what the manager says versus actually standing up and saying like, no, I think we're complete?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard question. The following phrase, is this MVP? Like, and it doesn't obviously work everywhere, but I have to use that constantly. Like, is this part of MVP? If it is part of MVP, it's going to put the deadline at risk, you know, because they're always going to give you a deadline, and it's always going to be a tight you know, it's always going to be a stretch. And so, yeah, it's being able to be diplomatic. First of all, finding out, is this something you can't live without? If you can't live without it, then we can do it, but this is what it's going to cost you. We are either going to have to get rid of this part, this feature, or we're going to have to push the deadline. There's really, those are the two answers, because we have, you know, we only have so many hands on keyboards. So
I feel like one of the answers to this question and so many others is, do you have somebody that you're working with on the project who can keep you sane? Are you working with somebody else? Because almost all of the mistakes I make of this nature come from doing it all by myself. I made that decision. I never asked anybody. So I just recommend working with somebody else all the time. Pairing, or what some variation on pairing is, you know, and this is for whatever skill level you are, right? Clearly somebody who's been around a long time makes this mistake, but if you're junior, find somebody to work with. Yeah, that's my favorite answer to every question.
yeah, definitely. And it's
tell
also,
you, as one of these you know, pointy haired bosses who do come to folks and ask and make requests, one of my favorite responses that I get is when they come back and tell me, you know, just very quickly what they're currently working on, or what's coming up next for them, and where they would ask me where I would like that request to fall in that short list. Like, hey, I'm finishing this up and then I'm about to head into this. Do you want me to stop now and push those two out, or pick it up after those two are done? To me, that's not pushback, that's clarification. And it's helpful to me because I cannot keep everything in my head of, you know, the things that are bouncing around my entire department. So that is a perfect and absolutely acceptable response, is just checking in where this falls relative to work I'm doing now and work that's coming up next.
So what about like everyday habits? Are there things that developers do on the job, just like little habits and things that you would say are maybe people don't realize just how much it reflects poorly on them, but are there things that you've seen other people do or done yourself, Ward, that you would say are just
Ward, is there anything you've done that
just those little habits, though, things that maybe
I
they're
have
okay
a
in another
long list
job.
of mistakes. I have a long list
good.
of mistakes you can
Bring
make.
them on.
Somebody actually, kind of put, when in the comments, somebody wrote, "We need to refactor our app to use standalone components right now." Oh yeah, that's a variation on another common mistake, which is, I just read about this new technology and we really need to use it. And I have a great story from my early days of doing that one, but I'll bet you all see it and feel it. Yeah, somebody want to take that one before I tell my tale of woe?
the chasing the new shiny?
Yeah. Well, all right, I'll tell my little story.
Tell your woes.
I was really young. And I just heard about this thing called the relational database. And it didn't exist yet, actually. I'm old enough to have been there before relational databases existed. But they had been defined. And I said, you know what this project I've been given really needs is a relational database. Now, it did not need a relational database, I must tell you. But nonetheless, I thought I would write one. And I did. And it took months and months, and it was terrible when I was done. And it was so completely the project had been this big, and I wrote the relational database. And then when I finally had my relational database written, I wrote the original solved the original problem in 2 weeks. That was after months of writing a relational database. So that's the worst case of seeing a shiny new technology, falling in love with it, and convincing your bosses, which we can do. Let's admit that they count on us to give them advice, and we are fully capable of giving our bosses bad advice. And I convinced my bosses that they needed a relational database when they didn't. And we can convince them that we need to refactor our app to use standalone components when we don't. And it keeps right on going. So again, find somebody sane that you're working with who can tell you that you're smoking something.
You need your pump the brakes person on your team, right? You need that person that on your pull request is like, but why are you doing it this way? Or why are we adding this dependency? Or how does this work exactly? Like you totally need your pump the brakes person on your team, because they will keep you from going off the rails. So I'm kind of good at being the pump the brakes person, but there are some times I'm like, let's do this thing. It's fun. We're doing it. Another thing I've seen with another bad habit that people have gotten into that I think reflects very poorly on people is if you get PR feedback from somebody, if somebody takes the time to review your pull request and they give you feedback, and you've done the thing more than once in your pull request, fix all the places. Like, please do not make your reviewer go through and call out every single place that you did this thing that they asked you to change. And then when you do your next PR, please don't do it again. Because that is very frustrating to be to review pull requests for people who just keep making the exact same mistakes over and over again. Because it does take time and effort for people to review PRs. And if you're actually getting good feedback from people, they're taking time to do that for you. And it's awesome if you can learn from those. I take all comments as a chance to learn. I want my team to comment on my pull request. I think another mistake you can make is taking it personal. It's just code. Like, don't get precious about it. If I write it and I didn't write it the best way, I kind of want to know that, because I don't want to write crap code that I find later and I'm embarrassed by. And so if somebody's going to help me out, that's great. don't take it personal, take it as a learning opportunity. Don't get defensive. Like I've seen people get really defensive in pull requests. It's okay to say like, oh, I missed that or whatever, but you really don't need to explain yourself. I kind of don't care what your reason was, unless you have a very good argument for like, unless you're like, well, I did it this way because blah, blah, blah. You can totally tell me that. But if you're just like, well, my mom was sick and I was worried and I missed this, like, I don't care, like, that's great. I'm sorry, but like, you don't need to tell me that. So yeah, just like take those comments seriously, learn from them. And then you can also give good comments yourself on pull requests.
But mom needed her noodles, like she needed her chicken noodle soup.
I know, like, I don't care. That was actually feedback I got. I took that feedback to heart when I was doing my crafting business, because if I was late shipping somebody, people didn't actually care why I was late. Like, they just wanted to know where their crap was, right? They're like, well, where's my stuff? And I'm like, oh, well, my dog was sick and then I had to make spaghetti, and, and they don't care about any of that. They're just like, when are you going to the post office? And I just think of it that way. If I did something, I missed something, nobody cares what I did, why necessarily, just tell them when it's going to happen. So.
What about you, Minko? Have you seen any bad habits?
I really liked what Lara said about taking feedback very defensively. I think that's like a pretty common pattern, and I have been hurt by feedback on my pull request as well. It's like a pretty vulnerable thing, because you put your work out there and someone comments on your work and they're like, well, and sometimes the feedback is also not the most constructive one. Sometimes people are pretty brutal in it. So being very careful about how you give feedback and how you accept feedback, that's pretty important. There is a really good talk from Google I/O, maybe 2010 or even before that, called Myth of the Genius Programmer. I would strongly recommend it to everyone. It's great. Just I discovered many patterns in this talk, and it helped me also get started contributing to open source. I had a big problem with asking, like Lara, you mentioned, you hold off sometimes with asking questions, and it's good to look for an answer yourself first. But there is also the other extreme. I've been in situations where I haven't been asking for questions at all. I remember my first job at VMware. I was with some large C++ code base, and it took me a month to compile the project. After that, I completed the rest of the project for another month, but just I could have asked someone, not to be feeling like I'm not doing well enough, and that's a simple thing, because things are complicated. That's just how they are.
Yeah, and I think
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think senior devs also need to be better at saying to people like, hey, here's a problem. I want you to work on this, work on it for 20 minutes, an hour. If you get stuck, try for this long, then reach out to me. Give people expectations, right? Because if otherwise you will literally have somebody on your team who's working on something that you could have helped them with in 5 minutes for 3 days. And that sucks. So yeah, definitely be let your expectations be known. And then to the point of the PR comments too, especially it is extremely hurtful when somebody comes in sort of an attack mode. Why did you do it this way? Why is your code like this? Obviously this is broken. There's a tone you can take that is a lot more neutral, to the effect of I'm not sure if this is we should do this, we should do that. I always try to, it's a team effort, right? We're trying to avoid this pattern, maybe do it like this. Just going in and being like, this is broken, that's not good feedback. You could be like, hey, this is broken, this is why, here's a link. There's ways to be a diligent reviewer that's helpful. And then there's the just sort of mean, I'm here to attack you and make you feel bad about yourself. Because that doesn't help anybody. So,
and that's kind of what I was going to say too, is I think just putting yourself in the place of whoever you're talking with for whatever reason, whether it's for a PR or what else, but just remembering what it's like to be in that other place, especially as a younger junior dev or even mid-level dev, having that softer communication, I think, goes a long, long way. But okay, so I want to be careful of time here, and I just want to get everybody's kind of last advice here on what should we do? We've talked about what not to do, but what are the things that you think really help someone? And again, the whole point of tonight's conversation, I'm so glad we're getting these things out, but it's to help developers really stand out in this really kind of funky place where everybody's got mass layoffs and everything. What are things that we can be doing to stand out, to give us a little bit more job security, or just to help us, I don't know, just be a little bit more successful as much as we possibly can? What are things that we can do in those ways?
Well,
I'm
I
like,
feel
somebody else
passionate
do
about
it.
this one. I feel passionate about one thing, which is that, and it's part of your journey as a developer, is to connect with what the purpose, the larger purpose of whatever project you're working on, or whatever assignment you've had. What's the value, really buy into the value and what difference it's going to make for somebody down the line, preferably the so-called the customer, however far away that is, and how does your organization see the value in what you're about to do? Because when you can connect your work with why it really matters, you can often triumph over bad requirements. You can actually put some focus on something that doesn't, you've been asked to do this thing, but you can ask questions about why you're doing that thing, and whether that is great a suggestion as it is. Maybe there's something at work that's more, that gets to the real reason why that became a requirement, and you can get beyond that and really contribute. And then the person who gave you that requirement sees that you understand why you're doing something. You're not just doing it. You have a sense of the why. And this is career enhancing. This is the best career advancing advice I can give you, because it allows you to rise above the doing of the little tech thing and connecting with the people who are where it matters.
Yeah, like if you can get your name out there, like the people that decide who gets the raises, who gets the promotions, if they don't know who you are, if they've never heard your name, you're going to be lower on their list, right? And the way you can be the person whose names answer questions in your work, I assume everyone has like a work Slack or a WebEx or like Teams or whatever, but be active in that. Speak up in meetings. I know it's awkward, and it's especially with imposter syndrome. Chances are you actually know a lot more than you realize, and you probably understand more than you realize. And it's okay to answer, like it's okay to ask questions. And you can also make space for other people to ask questions, even if you feel like it's oh, I wouldn't have asked that question. Like, well, somebody needs to know the answer to that. So, and a lot of times if you ask a question, there's somebody else standing there that also thinks the same thing. But yeah, and the more you can know the product, the more you can be the person that people come to ask questions, the more invaluable you become on that team. So if you know your product, if you know your code base, if you can be like, if somebody says, hey, does anyone know where we've mocked this before? And you're like, yeah, it's here on this file, and you drop them a link in the GitHub, like you're gold, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that you become a teammate that people need and that people want to have around. I also like to find a place where like there's a gap, right? So if you join a team, particularly if you're a team of contractors, or honestly any team, you get thrown together with sort of random people, right? Somebody might be really, really good at TypeScript. Somebody might be really, really good at CSS. You might be, in my case, one time I was the weirdo that knew how to read the Visual Basic code, right? So I became the domain expert on our legacy app, but I could tell them what was happening in that. Anytime people had questions about that code, I could answer it. And I was able to help rewrite that code because I understood how it worked. but I took the time to do that because I could see that no one else on my team understood that code. And so somebody needed to do that. So it's kind of like find a need, fill a need. Is that the robots movie? I can't remember, but
Well,
like,
also what you're describing there too is leaning into your strengths.
yeah.
You may not be the most talented developer. You may be new and things are unfamiliar to you, but you have strengths and you can contribute in other ways.
Mhm.
That's something I've had to really remind myself of, is I have more to contribute here than just my coding skills. And I need to let those shine more than I think I have in the past.
Mhm. Definitely.
And I can say, from my perspective, what sets apart people in my department are the ones who will bring me facts instead of drama.
Yes.
Like, I'm sure there's impact and I want to understand it, but I need to know the facts so
Mhm.
that I can make an assessment. The ones who can bring an attitude of, I will figure this out, or I will find a way. Like, again, don't bring me the problems, bring me what you intend to do about them. What help do you need? How can I help unblock you, right? Like, and all of that is wrapped into being a really good communicator. Like, introverts for the win. Like, if you don't feel comfortable stepping out, that honestly, to me, that's fine, but put it in writing, bring it up later, bring it up in a quieter environment where these things can be heard. Like, there's different ways to make yourself known, and please don't make yourself known by being obnoxious or arrogant. Like, there's no room for arrogance. We should all be lifting each other up and supporting each other. Those are the people that stand out on my team. And then focus on results. Like, we speak a lot about behaviors, they're very important, but focus on your delivery and getting it done, and communicate early when things are going off the rails.
Yeah, and to the point of like, get it in writing, like if things are going off the rails, that's the most important time to pen a very concise and just clear email to your boss and your, like, whoever else you might want in on that chain. I remember as a contractor, I had a client ask me to do something that was a very horrible security risk. They basically wanted the browser to be in charge of all the authentication. And I'm like, no, we like, there has to, like, it has to go through the gate. Like, we can't, the API can't trust the browser, but they're like, well, we don't have time to mess with that. So just go ahead. And so I wrote a letter to my company and I sent it to my product owner as well. I laid out what the problem was. I laid out what I was asked to do. I laid out what the security risks were for that. And I just, I politely declined to do that. I don't want to be sued if you leak a bunch of data. So it's really important. And that's sort of dramatic, but even just last week, we had an issue that came up at work, and it was sort of a vague-ish issue. And it was hard to tell with all of the fire that was going on, how bad it actually was. And so I took the time to write to my manager, this is what it is. This is what the risks are. This is what we've done about it. And these are the options for what we can do about it, next steps. And then he can take that to his boss, and I have it in writing. So
the thing you tacked on the end of that was so important, and it ties in with something that Liz was saying, which is, you got a problem, but never come with a problem without having a set of some solutions. Not the solution,
right?
But no boss wants to hear we got a problem and then it's like, yeah, what do we do about it?
Right.
And
we freak out.
Yeah, let's freak out about this again, because you become, as Liz says, the known freak out person. So I found that to be a career limiting move. Coming in with, hey, I think we've got, this isn't quite right, but we could do something about it, and here are some ideas, and let's focus on those. That makes it happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have two, I guess. One of them is about learning, and the other one is about overdoing things. About learning, people tend to focus about only learning different technologies, and that's really helpful. It could be even more helpful to balance between different technologies and also fundamental concepts, because they repeat across the different technologies. So learning Angular's API by heart, it's great if you have the capacity for that, but it might be even more impactful to understand how things work and what are the different trade-offs of using different approaches. You'll be able to reuse this knowledge with Angular, and other technologies as well. And another thing is just overly obsessing with software engineering. Maybe there is a period of life people need to go through for whatever reasons, but finding a healthy balance will just increase the productivity in the long run. Otherwise, there are burnouts, they're unpleasant. So even if when I joined the Angular team, Angular is my hobby also, so I had to find another hobby. Yeah, that's something I had to learn in different ways.
I think that's a great point too, because I think there's a lot of pressure, especially on people early in their career to okay, you're going to be at work and you're going to code for 8 hours straight. And then you're going to eat a sandwich, and then you're going to go and you're going to write more code for another 8 hours. And then you're going to sleep, and then you're going to come back and you're going to do it again. And you're going to just totally burn out. I mentor a lot of interns and early career devs, and every single one of them is I'm so tired. Is this normal? It is normal. If you're early in your career and you get to the end of the day and all you want to do is sleep or sit in front of the TV and, veg out and watch a program or play a game, that is normal. That is normal behavior. And it ebbs and flows, right? When I'm really focusing on a problem, I get to the end of the day and my brain is done. It actually takes a lot of energy to use your brain. It doesn't seem, I know that we get this oh, you just sit at your desk all day. It's yeah, but I'm thinking, and that takes a lot of energy. And so, yeah, it's okay to be exhausted at the end of the day. It's okay to make trail running your hobby, or horseback riding, or knitting. You can totally have some other hobby that has absolutely nothing to do with software engineering, and you can show up at your job and be amazing at your job. So
awesome. Well, thank you all so much. These are awesome answers. Great discussion. I think we just had an amazing panel tonight.